Collecting Hot Toys is an amazing hobby, but sometimes things go wrong and disaster strikes. Whether it be short-term or long-term, it's not fun. Today, we're going to go over common pitfalls in Hot Toys collecting and how you can avoid them so you can maximize the amount of enjoyment you get out of this hobby and the quality of your display. But before we get started, make sure to like the video down below, subscribe to the channel, and click the notification bell so you're notified when content goes live here. Disaster will inevitably strike, but today, we prepare our future selves for handling it. Thank you for joining me for another video today, and today we're going to talk about 10 common pitfalls, mistakes, or just plain unavoidable disasters that will derail your Hot Toys collecting experience at some point. So it's important we know how to overcome them. And I want to start with number one, that's impulse buying. Impulse buying is exactly what it sounds like, impulsive purchasing. Really what it is buying a figure on a whim. Instead of thoughtfully and carefully making a decision about whether that figure belongs in your collection, you impulsively buy the figure based on hype or expectations from other community members or any sort of other factor that could influence you without long-term consideration. Sometimes these considerations, such as the quality of the figure or the quality of the character or the quality of the figure's fit in your personal collection, are bypassed in favor of buying a figure on a whim because it's exciting. Hype can be a tidal wave that you can find yourself lost in very quickly, and it can be a resulting riptide that you're not going to be able to reach shore from. It's important to stick not only to your budget, but also to your tiers or your wish list or whatever sort of system you use to determine which type of figures and characters belong in your collection. Guys, there are so many great 1/6 scale figures that are being made these days, but not all of them belong in your collection. Just because a figure is amazing quality doesn't mean that you need to own it. This is something that I need to remind myself of daily because there are so many figures that I'm thinking, wow, that would really make my display look better. But it really doesn't, because it's not something that's that meaningful to you, and it's going to be the first figure to go when you need to make space for when something meaningful does come along. The second common mistake that I see quite frequently, and sometimes I have to stop myself from doing this, sometimes I even succumb to it, is buying figures first batch from Hong Kong often. I wholeheartedly believe that it's not the end of the world if you buy a figure Hong Kong first batch every once in a while. It's no different than drinking soda. You shouldn't drink soda every single day. It's not healthy for you, but every once in a while, if you're celebrating something or you want to just live it up a little bit and you want to get a Dr. Pepper, there's nothing wrong with that. But this can be a dangerous habit if you do just that, making a habit out of it. Making a habit out of spending more money than you need to for something is not a fruitful endeavor long-term, because you're going to have a sacrifice budget that's really quite lessened and allows you to buy less figures and build the collection you really want to, because you're overspending where you don't need to. Just remember, there are a lot of Hong Kong resellers out there, some of them more reliable than others. But the aftercare service is not going to be quite the same as if you were to buy it from Sideshow or Comic Concepts or somewhere like that, where you have a lot more coverage if you're just patient. The third mistake I want to talk about is overposing figures and damaging them. Now, as someone who reviews Hot Toys figures, this is one of the criticisms that I get every so often, that people feel I'm afraid to pose my figures dynamically. Well, I don't feel that I'm afraid to do that. I feel like I'm very cautious when doing that, because I did pay out of pocket for these figures and I don't want to damage them. And these figures can be quite fragile from time to time, depending upon the figure. So for me, I think a lot of collectors really do get quite overzealous with their posing, particularly if it's a Spider-Man or some sort of other character like Black Panther that requires some sort of a dynamic pose to make it look more, I guess, realistic and true to the character. Problem with that is these skin-tight suits or anything that has pleather components to it, it can be dangerous long-term to leave it in a pose that is, I guess, compromising in some way that could degrade the quality of the figure more quickly. And unfortunately, I do see this happen quite often, and a lot of collectors don't mind because they just want to enjoy the figure. And I think that's a perfectly fine ideology or philosophy to take on. But for me, I do care about the longevity of these figures, and I want to display them as long as possible in the state that they're meant to be displayed in. So for me, if there's any question about the longevity of a figure, if I've chosen a certain dynamic pose, I'll probably revert that figure and character back to a more static pose if need be, just to maintain the integrity of the figure's quality. The next one is not investing in the quality of your display. This is a really important aspect of collecting for me personally. Every collector is going to vary in their philosophy on this matter, but for me, I want to display my figures in the best light possible. I want to display my collection in a way that represents me. So I try to make sure my collection reflects that. I try to make sure my collection is clean and tidy and organized, so when other people come in and enjoy it, they don't have any sort of distractions or anything that could deter from their experience, which I hope is pretty positive because I love it. And that's why I think it's very important that no matter which display case you go with, that you put thought and consideration in how you're displaying these figures, how you're posing them, what sort of themes you're displaying in your collection, because I think that is a really important part of building a collection that you're proud of. Another mistake I see is buying lesser figures to fill a void. This is a difficult one for me because I don't want to outright suggest that you should never buy a figure just because it's not Hot Toys or in-art quality. And it's a difficult subject to tackle because there are a lot of characters who are never going to be produced by those two companies that are really worthy of having a 1/6 scale figure, particularly for collectors who have an affinity towards that character. But for me, if I'm displaying a figure that is not quite on that level or not somewhere close to it, to me, that devalues the experience of my collection because there's an inconsistent quality of display, which for me is a little bit problematic. Every collector is different though. There may be some collectors who truly do not care about that and just want that representation in their display. If that's your prerogative, I say more power to you. Buy the character that's really important to you. But for me, I try to recommend that people not devalue the overall presentation and quality of their display by bringing in products that just aren't up to par with the rest of their figures. The next one is not organizing your collection by theme. Themes bring order and cohesion. What it really is a category. It's a category of figures that are in one cohesive display that represent either one universe or one sort of thematic element that brings all those figures together in a consistent pattern. So as I've mentioned in other videos, I have a Marvel display case, I have a Star Wars display case, I have a movie and television display case, and I have a video game display case. These are separate themes that I can build based on the figures that I want in my collection that will really bring cohesion and again, order and structure to the display, which I think is something our brain does crave. The next one is getting into arguments on social media. This is something that I see quite often in any community. Figure collecting is certainly no exception. Social media can be a toxic place if you're looking for it, and Hot Toys collecting is not excluded from that at all. The problem with getting into these arguments on social media, one of the reasons anyway, is that it ignores the primary reason why you're here, to enjoy the collectibles and find escapism. Escapism is not stress. Those two should not be correlated or linked in any way. And I think in general, it tends to be somewhat stressful getting into these arguments and debates with people about opinions on a figure's quality. And this is something, including myself, that I think a lot of us can work on. There are a lot of people out there who truly just seek to get a rise out of you. I guess they don't have too much else going on, so they just really want to try to grind your gears and get you upset, which I think it's easy to take the bait on that sometimes. But again, we're all here for escapism and enjoying our nostalgic endeavors together. The next one is buying multiples of figures. Buying multiples of figures is a mistake that I have made myself many times over. It's a very difficult one when you get such a good figure in your collection that you say, I want to buy another one of these because I can display it a different way. In many cases, this doesn't go well because what happens is you end up running out of space for most collectors and you end up needing to replace that figure with something that you don't have a duplicate of already. In general, I find myself going in the opposite direction these days, and that's mostly because a duplicate of a figure is taking up a spot in your collection that could otherwise be filled by another great option that could bring more dynamism to your display and more diversity. And the next one is not spending time refining your poses. This is something that I truly need to work on myself. I tend to get a figure in one pose that I'm happy with and I just leave it until the end of time. But eventually, every so often, I'll walk by my display and say, that pose is not quite right from every angle. So I should go back to it more often, but I get busy and lose track of time. And that's truly how you fall out of love with a figure. If you get the right pose for almost every figure, you could fall back in love with that figure in a way that you might not have thought was possible. So finding that right pose that just hits different can really make you feel that that figure is integral to your collection. But if you don't have it in a pose that you're happy with, you might start to fall out of love with the figure and say, maybe it's not as high quality as I thought it was. But it could come down to the pose just isn't quite right for you. And the final one is expanding your collection beyond what's reasonable. Expanding your collection can always be a dangerous game. At what point is enough enough, and at what point is curation necessary? This is the question that we as collectors always ask ourselves. We're constantly in a battle of space and budget. Those are the two biggest concerns, and more often space is a bigger concern than budget for, I would say, the majority of Hot Toys collectors. But at the end of the day, I think it's reasonable to not have your collection expand outside of your space that you've already dedicated related to it. If you start to turn your house into a museum or some sort of other type of display that overruns it actually being a home, I think that's the time where it becomes a little bit beyond what's necessary. And that's that, guys. Thank you for joining me for this video of 10 common mistakes, pitfalls, or even unavoidable disasters in hot toys collecting. These are all things that I think we've partaked in individually, but if you haven't, let me know in the comments below, or if you have made these mistakes in your collecting journey, let me know where you're at in that journey. Do you see it as a problem? Do you see it as something that you're actively working to resolve? Let me know where your mind is at in the comments below. And of course, guys, if you like this video, make sure to drop me a like down below, subscribe to the channel, and click the notification bell so you're notified when content goes live here. It was nice to not actually be in a tank top this time. I'm a little bit more dressed up this time, so I appreciate the support, and hopefully there's some comments out there, commenting on that fact, but I guess we'll see. Only time will tell. Thank you guys for the continuous support. I appreciate you and love you as always. I'll catch you in the next video. Peace out. See you later. Bye.